Hello, and welcome to the Theological Family Ministry Podcast, a podcast for parents as well as children and youth ministry leaders. We are dedicated to showing how theological study and biblical application relate to the discipleship of children and youth. As always, we're hosted by Pastor Ben Palaz, the pastor of family and children's discipleship at Curtis Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia, and Tony Trusoni, the family and student pastor at Faith Family Church in Finksburg, Maryland.
Attention listeners, this is the second part of a two-part interview with Sarah Sleet and Corwin Kulig. If you're interested in listening to the whole discussion, we encourage you to go back one episode into episode 48, and I think you'll enjoy the beginnings of our conversations. But we hope that you're blessed by this special episode, and thank you and God bless.
Corwin and Sarah, how have you seen whether church presently or other churches effectively connect these two different age-graded ministries under a common vision, while still acknowledging that there are differences between those age groups? Corwin, what do you think?
I don't know anywhere that I've seen doing it amazing. I think, Ben, we're taking some strides to do that. We're trying, but I know one thing, just simply doing activities together. I do recognize, if we're going to have a session on social media and the dangers of that, and how to handle that may not be real suitable for a second grader, because in today's day and age, the second grader may have social media. So
they shouldn't.
Song of Solomon.
But if we're going to be talking about more, PG-13 rated stuff, we have, there's a setting for that, and then there's a setting to do the life together. And I think, the biggest thing is we just have to keep in focus. What are we trying to build? Are we trying to build our ministry, or are we trying to build God's church? And so with that, like I said, I haven't seen a church that's done it phenomenal, at all by any means. But I have seen some churches taking strides. We do a parent luncheon where we have, I think, similar to what Sarah, you were talking about that you and Tony are doing in the next couple of weeks, where we just feed our parents, take another opportunity to love on them, and then we break off and kind of explain where God's taking us. I think one thing, is trying to have the same lingo. So when we're discipling parents, we're talking to students. They're not hearing this completely different vocabulary. Ben's, speaking Greek over here and Corwin speaking Chinese over here. It's all the same. And so as much fluidity and connection there is, the better.
So, Sarah, how about you? Have you seen churches do this well?
That's a tough one. I really have not in a long, long time. And I will say the church where I grew up, I'm originally from Kentucky, they had a wonderful, almost seamless transition from youth group through into college ministry, and kind of being able to keep those college kids engaged and not lose them to college. But I don't think that I've ever seen in practice a student ministry that really that engaged from children's ministry through teenage ministry. And I will say I've seen some elements that they've worked together well with, that you see glimpses of that. And I would say and opportunities of service have given those opportunities for them to connect and to kind of have that overlap and shared vision. And so when you see a church that does Vacation Bible School, or what we call Mega Day Camp, we're able to use our teens as volunteers and kind of shepherd them in serving in children's ministry and connecting with the kids. And that's where you find, I think, the common ground is what is in service. And so that might be one of those areas that we can just intentionally focus on. Let's be training both elementary age kids and teenagers for service and for sharing their faith and teaching them how to share their faith. And I just yesterday had a teenager from our church approached me that said she wanted to help in a specific area in our children's ministry. And I was so excited. This child has been raised before my very eyes in our church, and to see her seeking us out and saying, "Hey, I want to give back and I want to serve the little guys." She's not afraid, and just boldly wants to go for it. So I think there are opportunities there, but having not seen it modeled, in my experience, I think it's a huge area for growth in most of our churches.
One thing I'll chime in here, I've been very impressed with Bethlehem Baptist in this sense. And Bethlehem Baptist, pretty much all of their online ministries equipping other churches are under the head of Desiring God. And Desiring God does not have a separate youth ministry conference and a separate children's ministry conference. No, they've always done it together. And now it's kind of under Truth 78. That's because that was their model in their church, was children and youth ministries function together under the Next Generations ministry. So they had a pretty large staff there for a long time in children and youth ministry, but they all worked under the vision of David Michael. And now David Michael's kind of carrying that mentality to a church in Indianapolis area, and where it's, they have in addition to the staff meeting every week, they actually have a Next Generations ministry staff meeting, and they talk together. How are we going to communicate a same vision? And I think that is such a healthy mentality, and it's growing. There are more churches out there doing it, but unfortunately, I think that's in the far minority.
Yeah. I mean, because it requires more work, but it can be a beautiful thing to see that taking shape.
Now, what does it mean in practice to have children and youth ministry share a common vision? I think we've kind of talked a lot in terms of idea and vision and theology, but what does it mean in practice?
So in practice and practically, like I mentioned earlier, I think it's, those leaders in those given areas just being able to sit down and pray together and plan together and just discuss ways that they can work together and communicate. And I loved your idea of like using that same lingo across the ages and generations. So I think just practically, you've got to schedule it and you've got to plan it.
Awesome. Now, Corwin, what do you have to add to that? I'll actually remember.
Yeah, I completely agree with Sarah. I think it's just making that a priority to sit down and plan with your student pastor or children's pastor if you are the student pastor. So Ben and I, we just would need to, and we do, just sit down and plan. What is not just short term, but what's long term? What are we trying to see? Where do we feel God is leading? And praying about it. I mean, I think, don't underhand prayer. That has to be the first and foremost. But yeah, I think just sitting down together, brainstorming, and I think not being scared to do things together. I think that's, for some reason, and I was talking to one of the senior adults in our church, that, and this may have been across the board, may have just been in the Baptist church, I don't know, but that they had Sunday school for each decade. You had a 50 Sunday school, you had a 60 Sunday school, you had a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 3, it was just crazy. And so I think just having to reshape the minds and working in a way backwards to try and erase some things that were happening. And so it takes time, and I'm not saying it was bad. Maybe it was beneficial to have, the decade of Sunday. I don't know. I wasn't there. But I think sitting down, devising a plan, but not being afraid to deviate from the plan, but just having an end goal in sight and asking God to fill in the rest of the way.
Yeah, and we keep asking, does this help parents to help their kids follow Jesus? And like you said, being flexible, I think is key. But
one practical way would be, and Ben and I, we've kind of mentioned this, and I think there could be a lot of fruit from this, but just sitting down together and coming up with ways to train our leaders collectively. Not just, okay, how do I train my student ministry leaders, and then Ben on his own figure out how to train the children's leader, but collectively come up with a discipleship way, because ultimately the people that are in our ministry leading are probably going to be future leaders of the church. I mean, that's just the reality. You just see it. There's people that way before I even got to the church that started out in youth ministry. Well, before that, they started out helping in children's ministry. Then they moved to youth ministry to help out. Now they help lead the young adults ministry. And one of them is a deacon, I think. And so. But eventually, those people work their way up to become leaders of the church. And so not only are we just discipling to make the ministry area they're serving in better, but we're discipling to make future leaders of the church. And so I think that coming together as a whole, and I think Sarah, you touched on it in the last question, but as a whole, your college leader, your children's pastor, your student pastor, sitting together and figuring out how can we disciple our leaders better across the board, and that way you're also, being not as compartmentalized in your discipleship tools and methods for them, and so they're unified to the same vision. And so let's say they serve in children's. Well, then they have to go through a whole other training session to go to students. No, it's one training session because we're all unified for the same goal, for the same purpose, and that's to make disciples for Jesus. And so just being unified in all of that, I think, is key.
That's awesome.
That's good.
And I think that will require so much humility, and that is one thing I'll just add to that. I mean, you really gotta to approach this, and the first step in all of this is just to have that humility, just to check your priorities in that sense, because I think it is so easy for us to think that our thing is the important thing, and other people's thing is less important.
Yeah, definitely.
So. Now, next question, how can we encourage the volunteers and leaders of each of these ministries to listen to each other? And Sarah, if you could kind of chime in first on that.
I think it comes back, everything comes back to communication for me. And I like what you just said about the humility of, not finding your own significance in this role, but really, and I think one of you guys mentioned it before, that this is just we want to serve the Lord, and we want to train these kids up to be not volunteers, but to be Christ followers ultimately, and how to disciple them the best. And so if we can all let our egos go, and just pour into that we share this common love for these kids, and we want to see them grow and succeed in their faith. And again, if you are communicating that vision effectively, then hopefully your volunteers and your leaders are going to buy into that and be encouraged and motivated. So I think that's one of the major benefits of this idea of a cohesive vision.
Now, Corwin, do you have anything to add to that?
I think, it starts with modeling it ourselves. I think we have to show that as a staff. And then I don't think it stops there, but I think that's where it starts. We have to be the example and model that ourselves, and then I think just strategically through that, figuring out, the communication piece. But that's what I would say, is to encourage anybody listening. If you want to start that, I think you first must look at yourself. Be humble enough to look at yourself and see how you model that. And that may take you being humble enough to go to that other pastor and say, man, we really need to work on this. Can we do that together? And that may be where it starts, But I think we just got to model that. And then we have to, I think strategically, I have more of a benefit because on Wednesday nights it's basically a little church service, for us. And so and I hate this word, but it'll ooze out of my message, and so it's easy that way. And then when I meet with students, it's easy to encourage in that way. And so, one big thing, I'm all about unity. We just all are here, and it's refreshing. But, I've been so burdened on how do we get our senior adult ministry more involved with the student ministry. And, I understand most of them probably with their health,